Welcome everyone to the It's Still About No Reproductive Rights webinar with Women for Kansas. I'm Ty Edwards. I'm going to be hosting and moderating our panel discussion today. We are so excited that you are here. Thank you for spending some of this beautiful spring Kansas windy day with us as we enjoy this part of our year. I should also say that this is Women's History Month, and this event is part of Women for Kansas celebration of Women's History Month. A couple of things I want to let you know. As you remember, in 2022, Kansans defeated the Value Them Both Amendment, which would have outlawed abortion in our state. And you might remember back in 2022 that Kansas was the first state that had a statewide vote after the Dobbs decision overturned Roe v. Wade. And we decisively spoke up on that issue and made the front page of many newspapers and news websites across the country as a result. A couple of things I want you to think about from the Women for Kansas perspective on this issue. Women for Kansas is proud that Kansans voted no on the August 2022 anti-abortion state constitutional amendment. To pursue our happiness and exercise our freedom, our bodies cannot be regulated more than firearms. Fertility is very complex, involving a wide range of medical and personal decisions about contraception, abortion, treatment for miscarriage, ectopic pregnancy, in vitro fertilization, and much, much, much more. Kansans and their medical providers are best equipped to make reproductive healthcare decisions that vary widely and involve many complicating factors. Make no mistake. Reproductive rights are on the ballot in 2024. Every Kansas House and Senate seat is up for re-election. Even with the defeat of the 2022 amendment, in the last 2 years, the legislature has considered dozens of laws that could restrict our reproductive rights. We must elect legislators who share our views on this issue. Vote in 2024 because it is still about no. Women for Kansas continues to support protecting the freedom of every Kansan to choose if, when, and with whom they start or grow a family. As Women for Kansas loves to say in our newsletters, democracy demands participation, and that's what we're asking from you today. In our panel discussion today, I'm really excited to have the folks that are with us here today, so let me do some brief introductions of our wonderful panelists. So first we have Erin Thompson. Erin has a breadth of legal experience. In the context of what we're examining today, a large part of Erin's legal practice has focused on protecting civil rights in the context of voting and reproductive rights. She was a member of George Tiller's legal team, and she was a part of the team that won women the right to bodily autonomy under the Kansas Constitution in Hodes and Nasser v. Schmidt. She is also a former elected official who served on the Roland Park City Council, and currently she is the General Counsel for Planned Parenthood of the Great Plains. So we're so excited Erin is here to join us. Ashley All has over 20 years of experience as a communications and political strategist. She's worked on numerous statewide campaigns, including Governor Kelly's 2018 victory. She was the communication director for Kansans for Constitutional Freedom, which many of you will remember from the August 2022 amendment fight, was one of the leaders in the state on guaranteeing our reproductive rights. Since then, she has worked on reproductive rights campaigns in other states, and she founded the Kansas Coalition for Common Sense last year to support and strengthen research-based communication and messaging here in Kansas. So thank you, Ashley, also for being here. Taylor Morton. Taylor has a background in organizing and state-level lobbying in Kansas. Most recently, she worked for Alliance for a Healthy Kansas, advocating for Medicaid expansion. Many of you may know that Women for Kansas has made one of our priorities in 2024, Medicaid expansion in our state. And thank you, Taylor, so much for your work on that. Today, Taylor is the Kansas lobbyist and policy analyst for Planned Parenthood Great Plains. She monitors and analyzes policies in Kansas that impact sexual and reproductive health care, and she is responsible for grassroots and direct lobbying in the state. And she'll be sharing some of that information that's very timely during our webinar today. The way this will work is we're going to go over some planned questions together. You can put questions in the Q&A as audience members, and we will get to those near the end. And hopefully we'll have time to cover everything that you're interested in. Okay, so again, thank you all for joining me. I'm so excited, and we can't wait to hear your thoughts and have you educate us on some of these issues. So to start first, let's start with, why do you think Kansans were successful in defeating the anti-abortion state constitutional amendment in 2022? So Erin, could you start us off a little bit on that one?
Yeah, I'll give some background, and I think my internet is a bit spotty, so if it is, I will turn off my camera, and hopefully that will help. But if you all remember, and I see a lot of my lawyer friends on here, so you're probably tired of hearing me talk about this, but if you remember back in 2015, Brownback was our governor, Obama was president. It was quite a different time. But in 2015, our Kansas legislature passed a ban on a D&E procedure, which is the most commonly used second trimester abortion procedure. And so we challenged that. And usually in the past, we would challenge lawsuits under federal law, or we had raised state constitutional claims along with federal constitutional claims. But in the D&E case, the Hodes and Nauser case, we only raised claims under the Kansas Constitution. So we alleged that it was unconstitutional under the Kansas Constitution to have that ban in place. We said that the right to bodily autonomy is in the Kansas Constitution provides that right. So we challenged that and only under the Kansas Constitution. We won that in 2019. We got a decision from the Kansas Supreme Court that indeed the Kansas Constitution has a right to bodily autonomy, and it is a fundamental right. So under the Kansas Constitution, the fundamental right to bodily autonomy, including the right to abortion, is subject to strict scrutiny. So at the same time, we had a federal right under Casey and Roe that was undue burden on the woman. So it's not strict scrutiny. It's a little amorphous. It was hard to pinpoint. It was really factually driven. And then in Kansas, we have strict scrutiny, which means any law regulating abortion has to be narrowly tailored and to advance a compelling government interest. And so our right in Kansas was higher than the existing federal right. And so then we all recall what happened in 2022, and Dobbs was implemented by the US Supreme Court. And so we no longer had that federal right. In the meantime, in 2020, the Kansas legislature proposed a Kansas constitutional amendment trying to take away that right and embedding in the Kansas Constitution that there was no right to abortion. And so that first was proposed to the Kansas legislature in 2020. And in Kansas, there is no signature collection. There's no way to get something on the ballot for the Constitution other than the legislature refers it. And so it has to pass both houses by 2/3 majority. 2020, that was defeated. There were moderate Republicans who voted against it. And so they did not get it on the ballot in that instance, which is key because it would have been on the August 2020 ballot. And so in 2021, we had a new legislature. Folks had lost their elections in 2020. And in 2021, the legislature did it again. It was able to pass both houses, and they put it on the August primary 2022 ballot, thinking that would be a low turnout election. Nobody would notice this. They did not factor in that in June of 2022, the US Supreme Court would overturn Roe and Casey. And so because our right was derived from the Kansas Constitution, we still had that right after the federal Constitution, constitutional right was overturned.
Yeah, thanks. That makes sense. Ashley, do you want to talk a little bit about the campaign related to the amendment? I know you were deeply involved.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Ty, for putting this all together. And thank you, Erin, for reminding us of that long and complicated history. I was actually in the governor's office in 2019 when that decision came down. I vividly remember standing in the airport answering phone calls. As Ty mentioned, I was honored to serve as the communications director for the Kansans for Constitutional Freedom campaign in 2022. I had worked on big campaigns before that, but this one really was very special to me for several reasons. First, as many of you, the reproductive rights are incredibly important to me, a core value for me. I have 4 daughters, and I, like many of you, were motivated to make a difference for our kids and make sure that they had the same constitutional rights that we did. And second, I was fortunate enough to play a small role in this historic campaign and in shaping the news coverage and the public perception of our home state of Kansas in a much larger context of national discourse around abortion rights post-Roe. So in the summer of 2022, it was a historic moment for our country for the wrong reasons. We lost our rights, but it ended up being a moment where Kansas really did become a beacon of hope, I think, for millions of women. Kansas was, as Ty mentioned, the first state in the nation to vote and win on reproductive rights. And I can tell you, having talked to hundreds of national reporters and international reporters during that time, they were shocked. They did not think we were going to win. And it is something that I will always be incredibly proud of. And we won because for many reasons, but because so many Kansans, many of you, many who were active through groups like Women for Kansas, got involved and worked their tails off during the heat of the summer. And not only that, we were able, we know that the vast majority of Kansans, regardless of political party, support access to reproductive health care. We were able to do extensive research and the work necessary to understand deeply how voters across the political spectrum feel about abortion rights, how they communicate about abortion rights, and how critical it is to our freedom. And because of that, we were really able to build a broad and diverse coalition of voters who defended our fundamental rights. And yes, the Dobbs decision did turn up the fire under a lot of them, but we also know from previous research that is something that reproductive rights and access to abortion care was something that the vast majority, I think 60% of Kansans support. And so there are many reasons why we won, but really one of the core, at least I think one of the reasons is that at our core, Kansas is a state that was founded on the belief that that people should be free to live their lives and make their own choices. And I believe that those free state roots, really came through clearly and loudly in that August vote. And it really, it came down to work, the work that many people did, not just myself. There were a huge number of people on the campaign, but also so many different organizations and just individual volunteers all across the state that really worked to make sure that this outcome happened and that our rights were protected.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Ashley. Taylor, do you want to talk a little bit about your activities during the election? I know you were in a different sort of capacity at the time, but what's your memories of that 22 fight?
Yeah, thank you, Ty, for the question. So yeah, like you said, at the time I was working with the Alliance for a Healthy Kansas, responsible for our grassroots and legislative advocacy efforts around Medicaid expansion. So while I wasn't working professionally on the August 2nd vote fight or in the reproductive justice space, I was, present in and around the State House and the grassroots, network type world. So, to me, just as, and I did some volunteering as a private citizen as well. But, to me, being someone who is involved in those spaces, I really just saw, to echo what my fellow panelists have already said, just the strong public support and mobilization and that, cross-issue collaboration as well. And just so much of that grassroots and peer-to-peer type engagement, talking to your friends and family about how they're going to vote and why this issue is important. And, talking to folks we know about the issues that matter to us can be a really effective form of advocacy and mobilization, in conjunction with those grassroots and legislative advocacy efforts and that direct lobbying piece. And I think we really saw that with the August 2nd vote. And it was, obviously a success.
Yeah, Women for Kansas, of course, did a lot of the things that Taylor was just talking about, too, from billboards to postcards to direct mailers to, thanks to Erin, she was our first speaker at our conference that summer in June, where that was a central issue. Absolutely. So we can remember that, too. Okay, awesome. Let's go to the next question, which is, even with that victory in 2022, why are reproductive rights still vulnerable in Kansas today and in the future? So, Taylor, can you start us off on that? You're muted. You're muted, Taylor.
Of course I am. Yes, absolutely I can. So, as Ty already mentioned, in my current role with Planned Parenthood Great Plains, I am in the State House basically Monday through Thursday, sometimes on Friday, sometimes on Saturday. But, really just paying attention to what's been happening under the dome this session, and to go with the theme of this webinar and this campaign, it is still about no. There are still lots and lots of anti-abortion bills being introduced, being granted hearings, being voted upon in the 2024 legislative session. And just because we did have this overwhelming victory on August 2nd, 2022, doesn't mean that the work is done. And Ty, if you want to pull up the slides, I can go over, and I have slides because there are a lot of bills that have been introduced this session that attempt to either outright ban, stigmatize, make it more difficult to access abortion in our state, despite that, again, demonstrated broad public support for abortion access and sexual and reproductive health access in our state. So I wanted to put it on a slide because it is a lot to go over just verbally. But I think it's important to just understand the context of what we're dealing with in 2024. So I have it kind of broken down by subtopics, so to say. So as far as bills that directly increase barriers, stigmatize abortion, we're seeing a lot. So House Bill 2749 has passed out of the Health and Human Services Committee and has been sent to the House floor. We're expecting it to be on the floor kind of any day now. So this is one that has a very timely element to pay attention to. This bill would require providers to ask patients the reasons they are seeking an abortion from a legislatively defined list of 16 reasons. And providers would have to report this information to the state biannually on top of the reporting requirements that providers in our state are already mandated to comply with. This bill stigmatizes abortion and increases the administrative burden on abortion providers, and there's simply no medical reason or research-based reason why this data would be necessary. So you can look at the list of reasons on the website. These questions are intrusive, deeply personal, again, just an attempt to stigmatize abortion and increase that burden on providers. Then we have kind of to the right there, I'm so sorry. My Zoom just crashed for a second. There we go. So House Bill 2737, otherwise known as the Abolish Abortion Kansas Act, would essentially be a ban on abortion in the state of Kansas. It would make abortion subject to criminal prosecution and remove exceptions for the wrongful death action for lawful abortion. So this, is one of the more overt attempts to restrict and ban abortion in Kansas. Then we've got Senate Bill 527 and House Bill 2813, same bill language, just introduced in both chambers. This bill would create the crime of coercion to obtain an abortion. It's, again, just stigmatizes abortion patients and creates and perpetuates a false narrative about decisions around reproductive health care. And, it's important to obviously, advocate against interference by anyone in one's own decisions about their health care, and that includes the government. Next, we have Senate Bill 528 and House Bill 2814, again, same bill language in both chambers. This bill would require that an ultrasound be performed prior to an abortion and have those ultrasound results and images provided to the patient. There is even a caveat in this bill that the patient may avert their eyes during the ultrasound. This bill just creates additional barriers to abortion and adds to the existing ultrasound requirement, which has been held unconstitutional. You can go to the next slide, Ty. Thank you. So, those bills were really, again, the more, some covert, some overt attempts to directly create barriers to abortion access in Kansas. But there are other, realms of the anti-abortion, legislative space that are important to focus on as well. And one of those, concepts is, the state support and funding of anti-abortion crisis pregnancy centers, or CPCs. CPCs are nonprofit organizations that promote themselves and present themselves as legitimate healthcare clinics, but operate with the singular goal of persuading pregnant people against seeking abortion care. So these centers, again, are marketed as legitimate healthcare clinics, but do not provide the actual comprehensive range of sexual and reproductive health care. So it's important to monitor any level of state engagement with these facilities. So House Bill 2789 would create two state programs to directly fund and promote these anti-abortion CPCs with virtually no government oversight. For those of you who were paying attention last legislative session, this bill is kind of similar to the Alternatives to Abortion program that was talked about in 2023. It would appropriate this bill would appropriate $4 million annually from the state general funds to these two programs. So again, it's just direct government funding and support for anti-abortion crisis pregnancy centers. House Bill 2809, or the Every Mom Matters Act, as it's referred to, would require the state treasurer to contract with CPCs, which again are not held to the same regulatory standards as legitimate medical facilities. And again, there's minimal to no oversight. Then we have Senate Bill 498 and House Bill 2764, same bill, two chambers. Would establish a tax credit for donations made to crisis pregnancy centers and provide a sales tax exemption for these CPCs. And Senate Bill 498 actually has a hearing on Tuesday. So if you are interested in submitting testimony against this bill as a private citizen or part of your organization, you can find out more information about how to do that on the Kansas Legislature website. And sort of the last subcategory of bills we've seen this year are, bills related to fetal personhood, or, the argument that human life begins at conception or fertilization. So we have seen the same bill introduced in the House and the Senate, Senate Bill 425 and House Bill 2653. This bill would further codify that fetal personhood language into Kansas law by allowing for the collection of child support by a pregnant person from the date of conception. Again, this is really just a backdoor way to grant legal rights to a fetus or an embryo, and it could pave the way for laws that punish pregnant people for seeking essential care. This bill is part of an anti-abortion agenda under the guise of providing supports for pregnant Kansans, but in reality, there are more meaningful policy solutions that would accomplish that goal of providing meaningful financial support to pregnant Kansans. So, this bill really needs to be looked at as just a means of, again, further codifying that fetal personhood language into Kansas law. So that was a lot, but, that's why it's important that we're here and that we are paying attention. And so thank you. And glad that you all are here today.
Yeah, I'm very grateful that Taylor is doing this work so that she can share it with us, because I know I haven't been following every single bill and it seems daunting to do so. So I appreciate that literally is part of your responsibilities. Ashley, do you want to talk a little bit about, your experience in 2022 and how that relates to how people think about reproductive rights?
Sure. I mean, obviously that that was a huge list of bills that were introduced this year. I think there were something north of 25 last year as well in 2023. And it's pretty disturbing that even after voters sent a really clear message about how we feel about politicians restricting our rights, that these same politicians continue to introduce bills, dozens and dozens of bills that are both anti-abortion or anti-health bills. As I mentioned, we were able to do a huge amount of research into Kansans' beliefs about abortion. And one of the things that was very clear was that most Kansans did not see abortion as a partisan or a political issue. They saw it as a personal or a medical issue, a religious or a moral issue, definitely a healthcare issue, but not a political issue. And so when politicians continue to push extreme bans and restrictions, it just shows, shows how out of touch they are with most Kansans. It shows that they are trying to politicize this issue time and time again. And it shows that they want to continue their advocacy towards, taking our constitutional rights away. And, The morning after the vote in 2022, my colleague Rachel Sweet, who is the campaign manager for Kansans for Constitutional Freedom, the two of us did a press briefing. It's like hard to even remember because it was so long and we were so kind of dazed and confused that morning. I had no voice left and we were running on adrenaline, but I vividly remember a reporter asking us specifically, like if we thought that this vote was going to end their constant work to restrict our rights or ban abortion. And without hesitation, the two of us answered together, absolutely not. This is something that has been going on for decades, and one vote will not stop it, which is why it is so important that we all remain vigilant, that we continue having these conversations, we continue talking to our friends and neighbors about what's happening in Topeka, and we continue to fight for our rights. And we continue to remind people around us that the lawmakers who ignore our voices and who ignore the vote in 2022 and who continue to exploit this issue for political gain should absolutely be voted out at every chance we have. And so getting involved and working and advocating for a candidate who supports your values and supports your rights should be everyone's goal this coming cycle.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Erin, do you want to talk a little bit about, sort of national issues and how that connects to what's going on with us here in the state?
Yeah, first I want to just follow up on Taylor's bill on the CPCs and how those kind of work. So they will put their buildings right next to abortion provider buildings. So
Uh-oh, she froze.
Yep, I froze. So
there you go. Yeah, maybe video off for a sec. Yeah.
So in Everland Park, there's one right next door to our facility, and they will put people at our driveway in vests that look like our vests and stop the cars and tell the patients that they need an ultrasound before they can come to their appointment and they can get that next door. So they're really troubling, really interfere with our right. And so I just want to kind of explain how those work and some of the underhanded tactics that they use on the CPCs. So on.
There you go. There you go.
Not cooperating today. So our right is derived in Kansas from a Supreme Court ruling, just like our federal right was derived from a Supreme Court ruling. So that means that if our Supreme Court moves to the right, they could they could look at it again and decide that was an incorrectly decided decision, just like the federal courts did. And so I think that really highlights why it's important that we have people who support the right in the governorship in Kansas. The governor ultimately appoints the judges and the justices, and so that is super important. And in Kansas, if we want that right embedded in our Constitution, we can't do a ballot petition like many states saw the success in Kansas, and they decided they wanted that success too. And so now they're doing affirmative ballot measures to put the right in their Constitution. So if we want that right, we would have to get 2/3 majority, as I said, of both the House and Senate. And so 2/3, the majority of people of Kansas seem to support this right, I think our vote told us. And so perhaps we can get our legislature to reflect that. I know there's a lot of interest in the Alabama ruling on the personhood. And in that case, there was a wrongful death action brought against the fertility clinic because somebody had dropped the embryos, and so they were destroyed. And so the Alabama Supreme Court held that they could bring a wrongful death based on the destruction of the embryos. And so that was the personhood thing in Alabama that has really made people focus on how far-reaching the Dobbs decision is. And I think it's another example of why our judges are important and why the people we elect are important. The people who appoint those judges are important. Thank you, Ty.
Yeah, awesome, Erin. Thank you for contextualizing a lot of that for us. That was deeply helpful. Okay, so what actions then do you recommend voters take to prepare for the 2024 election, right? The primaries and the general election that we have this year related to this issue. So Ashley, you want to start us off?
Sure. I already mentioned, I think it's important for each of us to really find a candidate to help. I mean, we all are all across the state, I'm sure. Find a candidate to help, donate, volunteer, talk them up to your friends and neighbors, because every election matters. Right now, the way that judges are appointed, as Erin said, the governor appoints Supreme Court justices. She also appoints appellate court justices. They are then confirmed by the Kansas Senate, but that can change. They've tried it before. They've tried to change the way judges are appointed, and that is all dependent on who's in the legislature. So it's really important that we work to elect people who represent the values that we share. And so look for a candidate who share our values, that believe in our rights, and to make our own decisions about reproductive care. And we should work just as hard as we did on the amendment this summer and going into the fall around these campaigns. After the amendment vote in 2022, we were able to do post-election research, and it was fascinating to learn more about how we won and how we were able to move people. And one of the things that was incredibly clear in the research was that the personal conversations with voters that voters had with their friends and family and neighbors were central to their choice and central to their vote. The volunteers who went door to door and made calls were absolute heroes. It was a lot of work and in the hot summer, and that made a difference. But also just every conversation that any of you have, you can canvass you can canvass anywhere. You can canvass in the grocery line, at the high school baseball game, at church, anywhere. And it makes a huge difference. One volunteer that I remember talking with personally was a woman named Mary from Pittsburgh, who called us like enraged after the Dobbs decision. And she wanted to help out. And our field director, Helena, trained her to canvass. And Mary went out in Crawford County, Pittsburgh, which is pretty conservative Catholic community and conservative county, went out and knocked like 600 doors in July, and combined with her friend group, they knocked 1,600 doors, and Crawford County, we won that county. And I think it's thanks to their work. So it does make a difference. So I encourage you all to continue doing that work, share your stories and your beliefs with other Kansans, even the ones who may not agree with you, because those personal connections are key to persuasion and change. And so, share the reason why you have your beliefs, the personal experiences that you have. It doesn't have to be an abortion story. It can be any story about why you support access, or, the story about your pregnancy or miscarriage or helping a loved one. All of those personal stories and emotion are key in persuasion and really changing people's hearts and minds over time. And that's what we should all be focusing on in the coming, 6 to 8 months.
That's right. Awesome. Taylor, I know your work is kind of directly connected to this. So tell us what actions you think that our listeners and people throughout the state should take.
Yeah, thank you. And I echo absolutely everything that Ashley just said. And I would add too that, I think sometimes especially in working in the grassroots advocacy space, there is sort of there needs to be more of an emphasis on, paying attention to state and local politics and elections, and it's hard to focus on anything but our national politics. Sometimes I really do understand that, but a lot of things happen at the Kansas State House. And even, I was talking to my mom recently about work, and she was like, wait, what happened? And it's like, people like, again, those personal communications, just telling people like, this is what's going on, and it's really important that we do something about it. That direct, again, peer-to-peer advocacy piece can be so important. I would also add, we have a lot of public record information about, legislators who have been in office, are currently in office, and a lot of them are candidates too. So you can look on the Kansas Legislature website to see, how your legislators have voted in the past, how other legislators have voted, on issues that matter. For example, the HCR 5003, which was the vote to decide to add Amendment 2 to the August 2nd ballot. Those vote records are public. We know exactly which legislators voted to add that amendment to our ballot in 2022. that's information that can inform how you vote. And also, attending things like legislator town halls and coffees and things like that, being able to ask them questions, ask them directly, what is your position on protecting abortion access in Kansas? Is this a priority for you? And, again, because legislators are candidates too. I would also add that Planned Parenthood Great Plains Votes has an issues and legislation webpage on our website that is relatively new. It is a great place if you want to just go, track and keep up with what's happening related to sexual and reproductive health policy in Kansas. Again, to stay engaged, during legislative session and in the lead up to the election. It has state-specific information, a bill tracker, a link to find your legislator, 2024 legislative session resources like that, and other things. So I would, want to plug that as well. And I would also add too that Planned Parenthood Great Plains Votes has a candidate endorsement process that's pretty straightforwardly laid out on our website also. Candidates are asked to take a survey if they're interested in seeking an endorsement from us. And upon completion of the survey, we'll consider endorsements for candidates who are then approved by our community outreach board and the general board for Planned Parenthood Great Plains Votes. So I wanted to make sure to add that too. But yeah, I think really just, if there, and I know it's hard, I really do that information overload, and you saw the slides with, I made the font as big as I could because there was just too much to fit on there, and it can be really overwhelming. But, having those conversations with people, having conversations with your legislators, talking to candidates, and just being kind of upfront about it. What is your position on this issue? Because, we know that sexual and reproductive health and abortion access is a winning issue. And, it's important to know how our politicians and candidates feel about that so that, we can elect folks who are going to protect our rights and hopefully have legislators that make decisions in office that reflect the broad public support for abortion access in our state.
Awesome. And Taylor, I'm going to show the slide real quick with the event. Do you want to share with folks a little bit about what that's going to involve?
Yes, absolutely. And thank you for saying that because I got so excited I almost forgot. So in partnership with Urge Kansas and Trust Women, Planned Parenthood Great Plains Votes will be having a lobby day. The Kansans for Bodily Autonomy Lobby Day is coming Tuesday, March 5th. It'll be around, from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. at the Kansas State Capitol in the second floor Rotunda North Wing. And I believe Ty is going to send out the, sign up link with more information. But, during this day, we're, just really going to be trying to be out there and, create a really visible presence at the State House to, again, remind our legislators that Kansans support abortion access. The public support is broad. When it comes to protecting access to sexual and reproductive health care. So we will be, doing sort of a brief call to action in the morning. There'll be breakfast. And we're just going to send folks off to go and meet with legislators, try to talk to legislators about, why these issues matter. We'll have, resources about all those bills that I just mentioned and, ways you can talk to your legislator about them. And we'll also, as I mentioned, the Senate Bill 498, the tax credits and sales tax exemption for crisis pregnancy centers bill has a hearing on this same day. So we're really hoping to get a very strong, public turnout to, be physically in that hearing, again, to demonstrate and remind our legislators how Kansans feel about this issue. So if you're in the Northeast Kansas area, or if you like taking a trip to Topeka, we would be so excited to have you at the lobby day. And yeah, we're very excited, very excited.
Yeah, and I want to say some of you may know that the Medicaid expansion rally is the next day, right? Wednesday. So if you're someone who can only go for one of those days, you can definitely talk to legislators about both issues while you're there, right? So whichever day you're there, make sure you visit your specific reps, right? And have your voice heard on any and all issues that are important to you, even if you only can attend, right, one day. A couple of things I also want to say from a Women for Kansas perspective is you also want to make sure that your legislators are aware of your views on this issue. So it's important to email them or call their office and voice your opinion, even if you know that they will disagree with you, because they need to hear that the people that they're representing don't share their views, and they need to be accountable for that. And I know a lot of people feel that that sometimes doesn't matter or doesn't change anything. I know from the representatives who represent me that they've talked about how when they talk about issues, the number of people who have called and talked to them about an issue does matter, right? They keep track of that. And so don't let that be something that you just don't communicate based on your own bias. So in other words, don't gaslight yourself, all right? You need to use your voice, you have it. No matter what you think the response will be, you are a voter and you deserve to communicate with your elected representative. I'm an educator, so something I always am telling my students is in our media in the United States, it's a lot of times national and sometimes even more internationally focused than it is locally focused. And that's because there's a larger audience, right? So if you need to make money off of your news, you want to, throw the widest net that's going to get you the most clicks. But in terms of our lived experiences, the closest government to you, the smallest government to you, is the one that actually impacts your daily life the most. And in terms of our reproductive health, this is most often legislated by the state governments in our states. And so even if you are not someone who regularly sees state news, you want to become more intentional about consuming it. So if you're someone who's on digital media, TikTok to Twitter, Loudlight is a great source of legislative summaries. They have a lot of information about these issues. You can, of course, use the Kansas Reflector. They are a website. They're also on social media, kansasreflector.com. They do a lot of great work of covering these issues so that you can learn about State House news. The Kansas News Service, so if you're somebody they're also online, but if you're somebody who listens to public radio, you can get a lot of great reports from the Kansas News Service about state politics. So these are just places that you just need to add to your news diet. You're going to have to intentionally visit them, but you will be well informed and rewarded by doing so. And when we were talking about Ashley's canvassing with your neighbors, those articles can sometimes be a good starting point for conversation, right? You can share them with people, you can text them to people, and they're a good thing for you to be like, have you heard about, right? Rather than maybe starting a conversation that may feel awkward and not grounded in today's events. We also need to remember that, and I think Ashley said this before, when it comes to elections, you either need to be the candidate or you need to be supporting a candidate, right? That's what Women for Kansas likes to say. In many of our elected official races, there are not choices, right? In many of our elections, especially for state government, it ends up being one candidate that's running. So a lot of voters feel, right, my voice doesn't matter if only one person is running. If you know someone in your community that you think would be good at doing an office like this, you need to ask them to run. We know there's documented evidence that women specifically need to be asked to run typically in order to do it. I heard Governor Kelly say at a Women for Kansas meeting when she was running for governor that she was running because someone asked her, right? These are the kinds of things that you need to do. You need to ask people. You need to tell them why you think they'd be good and why you support them. And then if you're someone who is asked, you need to think about that seriously because you are providing a choice to candidates, and that makes all of our candidates that are running better. They have to speak to more issues. They have to truly campaign. They have to tell voters what they care about. And so that's important. You, of course, can support a candidate with money or time or both, right? Again, you can canvass in your grocery line. You can canvass in all kinds of ways that might not be knocking on doors if that's intimidating to you. You can volunteer for campaigns. You can donate money to campaigns. You can also volunteer your time and your money for campaigns that are not for your own district. Maybe you have someone that represents you who you really like, who shares your agenda on this issue. There's other people in the state that need your help, right? They need your time and they need your funds and they need that work. And then I would say another thing that you need to ask yourself is, do women and reproductive people deserve equal rights in this nation and in this state? Being born with a womb or a vagina is not something that should lead inevitably to second-class citizenship. And it certainly shouldn't mean that we have to navigate a different set of laws simply to understand our health and to navigate its complexity. I know I came of age in the abstinence education era. That prepares you for literally no facts that you need to be a reproductive person. And I remember I said to a lot of people in 2022 that I think a lot of the women who came, and maybe the men too, who came of age in that period, we grew up and we were like, oh, my fertility is much more complicated than that. I need more information. And I think that's one of the things we saw in that August 2022 vote is many more people's acquaintance in their personal relationships and their personal lives with the complexity of fertility. And that requires medical professionals, not government intervention. All right, so let's take a look at some of our audience questions. Remember, audience members, you can put questions in the Q&A. We'll try to get to as many as we can. So let me look here. Let me see a few of our questions. Okay, so here's one. It seems that women are going to have to save our rights and democracy in November. If we wanted to help get women out to vote in a swing state, what state and organization would your panelists suggest we focus on? Do any of you have any thoughts on that?
I'll jump in first. So really, I mean, there are going to be, I mean, if you're speaking directly to reproductive rights and campaigns around reproductive rights, there are going to be many this year. It's still, you know, there are still some that are kind of in the early stages of signature collection, our neighboring state of Missouri, for example. And so I would say, look for those campaigns, especially in Missouri. Donate, go volunteer, just, you know, take a drive across the border, because they did the same thing for us. We had volunteers in, you know, in the Kansas City metro area from Missouri who really like fought for our rights as well. We can do the same for them. Other states, you know, I think Florida may, Arizona, Montana, Nebraska. I mean, there could be a lot of ballot initiatives happening this year. And so, you know, look for a place that you think you can be helpful, and really encourage people that you know in those places to get out and vote. You know, and if you're not, you know, if you're talking about partisan races, absolutely. I don't know. I would say organizations are kind of, it depends. You know, look for the political party probably if you're doing partisan campaigns. But again, if you're interested in working on ballot campaigns, just go straight to the ballot campaign organization in Missouri. It's Missourians for Constitutional Freedom, similar to the Kansas campaign.
Yeah, Taylor, do you want to add anything there? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Ashley got it all, but I just wanted to say, in terms of the voter engagement piece specifically, the Voter Network is a great organization to work with when it comes to, you know, they have really helpful online tools to, you know, do voter engagement outreach and things in your community. So that would be one organization that I might suggest as well.
Erin, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, just nationally for federal races, if you're looking for candidates who support reproductive rights, Planned Parenthood Action Fund is our national organization that endorses those candidates. And Emily's List also is always a good one for national candidates.
And I will say, some of you've asked in the Q&A about if you can get like the links to when Taylor was mentioning the issues in legislation. I am going to send those out afterwards. So watch for that in your inbox and I will send that. And I'm taking notes with what they're saying right now so I can add some of this stuff to that email. Okay, Erin, we have a question for you directly. Would any of the current anti-abortion Kansas bills that Taylor was showing us, you know, that are in the legislature right now, do you think any of those would be deemed unconstitutional by the Kansas Supreme Court?
Yeah, I saw that. Thank you, Marla, for that question. So some of them that Taylor mentioned would most likely not withstand constitutional challenge. So the Kansas Supreme Court has not ruled directly on whether the government interest in protecting potential life is a compelling interest. But again, any regulation would have to be narrowly tailored to advance that interest. So even assuming that it is, like the ultrasound requirement, the current law is if the physician is going to use an ultrasound, they have to offer the patient a chance to view it. That law was held enjoined last fall by a district court in Johnson County. And so the change that we have to show it, I don't know how that could withstand scrutiny if just offering it didn't withstand scrutiny. The one for sure that makes women list whether they're getting an abortion because they have too many kids. I mean, there's some really offensive choices that they have to make. I don't know how they could argue that advances a compelling state interest. So I think that we would certainly be looking at those and have a strong argument that they would not withstand that challenge.
Awesome. Thank you for that clarification. Okay, so here's another question from the audience. Why are we always fighting to stop restricting bodily autonomy? How do we get bills introduced that actually support our bodily autonomy or protect clinics, like you were mentioning, Erin, with the sort of hairy nature or harassment that the Planned Parenthood clinic faces? How do we get the opposite kind of bills introduced?
I can jump in. I actually very recently was just having a conversation about this very thing. And I think, it's unfortunate sometimes that, we place so much defense. But it is important, to promote and ask for proactive policies that, protect and expand bodily autonomy, not just defend against attacks on bodily autonomy. So, I would say one way to maybe try to advance that is you could talk with your legislators. Legislators can introduce bills on behalf of organizations and individuals, or, you can call your own, senator and representative and say, hey, if it's somebody who, is supportive of, abortion access, bodily autonomy, and the issue, just having a conversation with them and saying, what are you doing, not only to defend against attacks, but to promote and advance good policy that, expands reproductive justice in our state. That could be one step in that direction, but that comes to mind right away. And I think it's important too to remember that our legislators work for us and they need to hear from us in order to make well-informed decisions in office. And I think, sometimes there's a perceived, power dynamic or whatever you want to call it. Like, I remember the first time I called a legislator, I was like shaking when I was holding the phone because I was so nervous. And then afterwards I was like, I can do another one. Like, I can call somebody else. Let's do this. But I think, just establishing that relationship and starting that conversation, if you are someone with a legislator who is friendly and supportive of this issue, is one way that comes to mind.
I would also, I hate to turn it back to politics, but quite honestly, the way we get it done is by changing the makeup of the legislature. We have to have, right now, there are a whole bunch of legislators who have no accountability for their votes and really don't introduce or support bills. Even, we're just to go off topic for a minute, Medicaid expansion. Medicaid expansion is supported by 80% of Kansans. That is a vast majority of Democrats and Republicans, and we still can't get. It's been 4 years since there's been a hearing on that bill. And so it is clear that the current makeup of the legislature, the people who are elected, are not listening to the people they represent. And we need to make sure that they either do or they're replaced. That is quite candidly the way we get it done, and the way we make sure that the values that we share are more are focused on in the legislature. That's education, that's that's reproductive rights, that's healthcare for people, that's just a couple weeks ago they introduced a bill that would have prevented children from getting summer food. It's absolutely ridiculous, but those are the people who are representing us, and until we change that, we will end up with the same outcome.
And if I can add quickly to that vein, absolutely yes to everything that Ashley said. We also now, because we have the voting data, the poll results from August 2nd, there are a lot of legislators currently in office who support, introduce, promote, vote for anti-abortion, anti-sexual reproductive health policy, and they had a vote no margin of like more than 20 points. And bringing that to them and saying, listen, this is the reality of how your constituents feel about this issue. What are you going to do to prove to us that we should reelect you, or, things like that, making that known.
What another question we have here is, you've talked about various examples of direct action. Do you know of anything that people are planning that's new in terms of activism related to this issue? And they give some examples. Are you planning a more direct focus on confronting like personhood that we talked about, or on getting more faith leaders involved, or dealing with the racism that's inherent in anti-abortion legislation? Do you know of anything new, for example, that people are focused on?
I will ask, I can see Taylor is thinking, but I will just note that we did, KCF actively involved faith leaders in the 2022 election. And so I think that is a good flag. And I think those are outreaches that we should continue to make.
Absolutely. And I would add too, adopting a distinct focus on, Black health equity and Black maternal health equity. There are organizations like the Kansas Birth Justice Society and other really incredible organizations doing work directly related to the Black maternal and infant health. And that piece, I am new to Planned Parenthood myself, so I don't know, can't fully speak to. I know this has been something that has been happening for a long time, but I think, again, like constituents can adopt that focus as well, and like that distinct focus on, Black maternal health. And, even in the context of, it's not directly tied to abortion access, but it is, in the realm of bodily autonomy. Planned Parenthood, Great Plains Votes, and, other organizations have been, seeing a lot of push for, menstrual equity legislation, the idea that everyone who has a period should have access to the period products that they need every month, and policies that make that easier. And, that's been a way to collaborate with organizations, again, in that cross-issue, cross-sectional kind of way. And I think that's something that can be, adopted and modeled in the grassroots context as well.
I will say someone did put one idea in the Q&A, which is that we should have a celebration on August 2 this summer in celebration of the passage, and use it as a sort of rallying moment related to the election in November. I think that could be an exciting idea. And I will say, generally, activists sometimes struggle to celebrate their victories. They are on to write the next fight immediately, and this might be a good example of celebration. Okay, well, we're running out of time, so I wanted to get to one last question, and I hope all three of you can answer this one for me. When it comes to this subject, reproductive rights, and your work related to it, how do you remain hopeful and motivated in continuing to focus on this work? Not all at once.
So as Ty mentioned in my intro, I have, it was, I think we can all recognize that there was we lost an incredible, it was an incredible loss in the summer of 2022 around DOPS and Roe being overturned. I would say, obviously, that August vote lifted people and really gave people hope at a time of like incredible despair. And ever since then, and people have said that to me, I've continued to go and work on other campaigns in different states, most recently in Ohio this past fall. People were motivated by Kansas, and we should all be proud of that. And so that's what I really look at. And I know that Kansans, by and large, support reproductive rights. And yes, we are playing defense quite a lot. But I'm proud and motivated because of that vote, and I know that where people really are. And yes, it's hard work, and it's frustrating work sometimes. But really, we should all be proud of that. Proud of every single person probably on this call did work related to that vote. And we have a reason to be proud, and we have a reason to go back out and continue working for candidates that support our rights. So that's how I stay. That's how I stay positive. And I look at my kids, and I'm like, you know what? For a couple of weeks during that summer, it was, these kids are going to grow up with fewer constitutional rights than I had when I was their age, and that's absolutely unacceptable. And so that's really, I continue to use that as motivation, and making things better for them, from now until, they grow old too.
So I've been doing this work in Kansas for nearly 20 years, I think now. And there were times, particularly in the Dr. Tiller days, where it felt very lonely and we were the only ones doing the work. And I know that's not true. And I know you all were there with us, but there were times that it felt like that. And it was so hard. And I cannot tell you how healing and that August 2nd, 2022 election was for me. And people want this, and we are doing the right thing. I always knew we were doing the right thing, but we are giving people the right, their healthcare, their absolute basic rights to healthcare that they need. And some of the cases that we see of people coming from out of state right now are horrendous. And so the fact that we can give this care in Kansas is just, I'm so proud of the work I've done and the work all of us have done. And that August 2nd election was just it was truly life-changing for me and my outlook on all of it. So I thank you all for your work on that. And then even just a month ago in Missouri, we had our kickoff for the ballot petition in Missouri, and people couldn't get into the event in Kansas City because so many people were lined up. And people want this right. They need this right. And it is just knowing that, and that we can provide that care, keeps me going every day. And so thank you all for the work you did in 2022. I didn't know I'd get emotional, but it happens. So we just have to keep the momentum going. There's going to be a lot of potential rulings out of the U.S. Supreme Court this summer. There's one on the MIFI, which is the medication for the medication abortion. We will see what they do with that. Hopefully they don't ban it, but keep your eye on that. There's a couple of other cases. So there's always challenges ahead. And we know that the support is there. And so we'll just keep going. And thank you, Ty, for organizing things like this, because it's always good to get together and talk with other supporters. And that is always nice and refreshing as well.
Absolutely. I again echo the sentiments of my fellow panelists, and Erin, you made me a little misty-eyed there too. I would say for me, it's always just, again, like there is a disconnect between what Kansans want and what is being reflected in the legislature. That's not my point of hope. My point of hope is that, it really, with every conversation I have with a grassroots advocate or, a community member who, approaches me at the State House and says, "You're with Planned Parenthood, I have a question. I want to do, this and that." It's that we have more power than we know. And I think we got to see that on August 2nd, that, because in theory, democracy is supposed to be something that works for the people. It's supposed to be reflective of the people. And that awareness of the divide between what Kansans want and what the legislature sometimes does, there's awareness growing around that. And I think that brings me a lot of hope. And I can see the mobilization and the, ambition and excitement to get involved and make our voices heard, because we saw that we can do it in Kansas, and Kansas voters are smart. We pay attention, and we can do that together in a collective way. And August 2nd really, solidified what we already knew about that. And so to kind of I could talk about this all day, but for me, it's really just that connection with, actual constituents, actual Kansans, and, and the empowerment that comes with that collective using of our voice.
I agree completely. August 2022 was a wonderful statement of how if this issue is important for you, you are absolutely not alone in our state, no matter where you live in our state. And I will say, I think one of the things that keeps a lot of us Women for Kansas together is each other, right? You need people to support you as you're fighting this fight and doing this work. And if you don't think you know someone in your life, I bet you do. But if you don't think you know someone in your life who shares your support of this issue, when you look at this video, by the way, we're going to post this video on YouTube, but it will also run on our socials. Look for people in the comments that say something positive and reach out to them. You are absolutely not alone in our state as someone who cares about these issues, and having more people you can talk to about it and do things like canvassing together, or other aspects of contacting a legislator or going to the Capitol or helping with an election. Those are all things that are more fun with more people. And that's another way to do it, is to build relationships. One of the things we've all talked about here today is that democracy demands your participation, right? If you want to maintain freedom, you have to participate. A lot of us don't feel like we were maybe raised in a climate that taught us that liberty actually does require constant vigilance, right? Rights are not something that are secured and then you can go back to ignoring them. You have to do this kind of work, especially in important election years like this one. So I want to thank you all for joining us. Women for Kansas, you can visit us at womenforkansas.org. All of our work is supported by sponsors, memberships, and donations. So if you want to help us with this work, like a Zoom webinar membership, for example, that we have to pay for to do things like this, you can find more about that on our website. Again, we'll be posting more in our newsletters and on our socials and on our website as we get closer to the election. And I will send out some resources to those of you that are with us. And again, you can watch this video on YouTube in about a week, or we will also post the links to it on our socials. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you, everyone, for caring about this issue. And don't forget, right, you need to vote this year, and you also need to support candidates or be the candidate. All right. Happy March. Happy Women's History Month. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.